big steamers. And that's how I got the job, through a friend of my dad.
So when you say it was the hardest job you ever did, what do you?
Shoveling coal into a furnace, hot, what would they call it? A fire tube boiler. The boiler was a big round cave, but in it were pipes. Oh, I don't remember. That the fire went through as it went out the smokestack. And in the fire tubes, it would make steam, and the steam would be then go to a cylinder, a large cylinder on the top of the engine, about, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet across, and that would drive the propeller, which would send the boat. And you do that for 4 hours, then you'd be off asleep for 8 hours, and then do it over again, do it over again, do it over again.
So was that 24 hours a day? You'd work for 4 hours on, 8 hours off, 4 hours on,
That's
8
right.
hours off through the
Yep.
night?
I think that's what I remember.
That does sounds like an adult wouldn't be able to do that because of the lack of routine.
Well, I remember the first mate that I was roomed with in a what was called a stateroom, but it was a kind of a dungeon. And the guy started off immediately bragging about how hard he worked. And he didn't stay on for very long. So there was just a continuous flow of laborers on the boat, especially in the engine room, in the coal passers capacity. The deckhands probably worked as hard, but because they had to be outside of the weather, and they didn't do a lot of hard physical work. They did a lot of painting and chipping the paint off, the old paint, and I don't know. I thought I had a good job, and I liked the job I had, and was happy to have a job.
So when you're working shoveling coal, you say you're 4 hours on. Are you literally shoveling the coal for 4 hours, like shovel?
You do. Or then you may be on with another man right next door to you, and you might be able to. I don't remember being able to spell each other, but I do remember 2 fire tubes, and you would both work, and it was one amount of steam that was going up from the tubes. And I know I'm sure that we bitched a lot about how bad it was for us, but there's been men doing it for 100 years, and of course when they converted from coal to oil, then pumping oil and controlling valves to see how much pressure you'd have and how much oil you had in reserve.
So how
So I
much?
did that for just a summer. It was only a few months.
But how much coal would that? How big was the boat, and how much coal could it eat?
Big was, the boat was big. I don't remember, and I didn't note it, but you could find steamboats on the Great Lakes. I think the biggest one was 1,000 feet long. And they carried stuff like coal from one port to another. And they carried a lot of grain from the Midwest. Superior, Wisconsin, and Portland, Maine. Not Portland, Maine. Portland. I could have.
Is there a Portland in the Northeast besides Portland, Maine?
Yeah, but it's not the Northeast, it's the Midwest.
Oh, okay. I work in Portland, Oregon.
Okay. And I wasn't in Portland, Oregon. And why I said Portland, I don't know. Just because I know there was a Portland, Oregon. But we'd go from Superior, Wisconsin, down through Lake Superior, and down through, I don't know what they've got. An atlas here or not. Anyhow, Lake Superior, and what we would see, one of the features of Lake Superior is Isle Royal, and it's the biggest inland island in the world, I think. Like 50 or 60 miles long. And it was just an event that you would cross, that you would made it through across the country once you had done that. And then you went through the Straits of Mackinac. I think.
Is the Straits of Mackinac on the Great Lakes?
Yeah.
Between two lakes?
Between 2 or 3 lakes. They'll kind of come together. And they've made a canal, the Soo Locks.
S-U-E?
No, S-O-O.
S-O-O.
And John Denver made a song about it. And then he made a song about one of the ships was steaming and a freak storm came along and it went down. And how that...
I know that story. I know the song. Yeah, the 1970s, probably the mid-70s.
Right.
Yeah, I can't recall, but yeah, I remember the song. When you started talking about that, I knew it was going to be that song.
Yep.
So it seems to me, so you did a summer, you were a teen, like 17, 18?
Yeah, yeah, I must have been 17 because I graduated high school in 58, 1958. And whenever we'd come into Buffalo, my dad would come in, pick me up at the dock, and I'd say, boy, I'm sick of that because I'm going to quit. And he said, don't quit. Hang in there. And I did. Very proud of it. Because I saw men with no brain at all they were good coal passers, but they never had a new thought in their mind ever.
Coal passer.
Coal passer, yep.
So was that a particularly memorable moment when your dad said that? When your dad said don't quit, was that like a really super memorable moment in your life?
Oh, quite vivid, yeah. So I'd always go back. And it was summer. It was only, I don't know, 4 weeks, 8 weeks.
Which you said, you mentioned someone helped you get that job. Who was that person?
Jerry Newberry, who was my dad would put his, no, Jerry Newberry had a weekend farm. He traveled a great deal. And my dad decided that would be a good job for me because it would pay good and would be hard work. I think I had worked hard as a kid, up to that age, but this was real adult work. And going ashore and getting drunk and I went in the Coast Guard.
Do you think that the simple fact that you were working on a ship kind of got you moving towards the Coast Guard?
I don't know.
When you were talking,
I must have had the thought of going in the Coast Guard. It had been a positive experience, whatever it was. And the Coast Guard makes an effort to present a good image. They always have and always will, I think. There was a ship here in, where are we? Olympia. On display, and it said something about the Coast Guard on it, but I was quite sure that it wasn't under the operation of the Coast Guard because it was kind of crappy looking. It was rusty and hadn't been kept to the standards that the Coast Guard tends to always be. Well, the motto is always be ready. So I was on the Steinbrenner, George M. Steinbrenner, (1960). Or that's what I put here, but I put a question mark after it. So maybe it wasn't exactly 1960. It was in the fall Sally and I got married in 1964.
When were you born?
Pardon?
When were you born? What's your birth year?
1940.
1940.
Yep.
So 24. You were 24-ish.
Yep.
Did you spend a lot of time with your father growing up? Was that one of your
I would say yes.
fishing and?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I had a good childhood. I mean, he was good to me and he wanted me to be a good guy. And he worked hard. He was very muscular, and the farm work. He said something to the effect that he knew they weren't making any more land, so he bought the farm, which I don't have written here, but I think I remember it being 85 acres, which today is small, but back then in that little valley that we lived in, the Allegheny Mountains, it was pretty eventful. In town, I remember we lived on what they called Back Creek Road, and the farm occupied about a mile on that road. So we were, I don't know whether I thought of myself as being important, but I know my dad was an important taxpayer and so on in the town. And I don't remember anything negative about the farm.
So when you were a boy, let's say do you have young memories? I'm trying to think about, so how you started shoveling coal on that ship.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were a boy, you essentially worked on the farm. Is that what you did for?
I did.
And
to feed the cows, move hay around and bedding, and
did it feel like you were supporting the family doing that? Is that what it felt like, or did it just
don't remember
you just had chores?
But I remember in I remember the barn burning. It was in November, in a late fall thunderstorm, a lightning storm. And lightning struck the barn, and it struck in the top of it, of course, but it weren't, you know, how straw had been blown in there. He had harvested he had a combine that he towed behind the tractor, and as he went through the field, the oat shocks were tied off by the machine. They had a tying device, and those bundles would fall on the ground, and then I or my grandfather would pick them up and throw them up onto a flat wagon, and someone up on there would arrange them so that they could be stacked, and then tow that wagon load of grain and straw back to the barn, and there was a large farm nearby, and they had a combine, and the combine would accept you'd throw the bundle up onto the conveyor belt or conveyor chain, and the machine would break that straw up, and there must have been a fan in there, I'm sure there was. It would then blow the straw to one side and the oats, the grain itself, to another direction. And the guy would be standing there with a burlap bag, and the grain would end up in the bag and then be tied off. And the straw would then be blown out through a pipe less than a foot in diameter, but more than 6 inches. And that was blown into the barn. And in that barn was just flopped down loose, and that was where the lightning hit the barn. And it was like lightning, like you'd thrown a match or thrown a flame into the barn. And I can remember jumping up out of my bed and looking at the barn, and the boards were flying off of it from the lightning striking it. So that was the end of my dad's career as a farmer. He didn't, of course, he had to farm the land. And I don't know whether maybe he had sold, subdivided the land with a survey or something. And found out that it was pretty easy to sell lots. So that's what he did. And we had a neighbor across the road who was in the real estate business as an agent. And Neil would come over and talk to my dad, and he'd say, "Elton, I can help you sell these lots." And Dad would say, "Neil, I'm sorry, but people are coming to me to buy the lots. I don't think I need an agent," which was kind of typical of their conversations that happened more than once. And he'd always joke about Neil wanting to help him, and he couldn't help him because Dad was being helped by the economy, and as the city of Buffalo that area became a suburb of the city.
How do you spell your dad's name?
Pardon me?
How do you spell your dad's name? Elton?
Elton, E-L-T-O-N.
Okay.
Like Elton John.
Yeah. How do you know it was lightning that hit the barn? You were actually awake at the time?
I saw it.
Oh, you saw it?
I mean, the storm was coming through the valley, and it hit and there was a lot of thunder, and I was awake, and my bedroom, which I've since slept in as a grown-up, but the barn is not there anymore. It was pretty traumatic for me, and it didn't surprise my dad. He said for a few $100s he would have had lightning rods on the barn, because typically they do have them. And why he had ignored that kind of rule of thumb, I don't know.
What is the process by which a lightning rod protects a barn? What is that process?
It intercepts the lightning from going down into the ground.
So is a lightning rod connected to a cable that goes into the ground?
Yes.
So the lightning hits the lightning rod and it takes the electricity into the ground?
Correct. Which we know you typically, or it hits a tree, if the tree happens to be here and it's a little taller, it'll hit the tree. I don't know what the odds are of it going into the tree, but a lot of lightning ends up going into the highest feature of the land.
When you said the barn burning down ended your dad's farming career, was he an old man at the time?
No.
So how could it end? What did he do then after that? How did he support the family?
He had already sold 1 or 2 lots, and maybe he had spent the money for a survey of subdivision of the farm. And when he put a sign, I'm assuming, put a sign out, lots for sale, or put something in the Buffalo Evening News newspaper, people immediately wanted, because the city had budget problems, and the steel mill, Bethlehem Steel, was right on the edge of Buffalo, and Hamburg was in between North Boston, or our farm, Back Creek Road, and downtown Buffalo. So it was, and other than being kind of isolated in the winter when it snowed 3 to 4 feet, it was natural that farms, I think 1 or 2 of the farms had already subdivided. And he was aware of how hard he had worked, and how hard the neighbors worked, and some of them didn't work that hard. If they had subdivided, they had it made because their dad had a farm and they inherited the real estate. And then he left very purposefully. I mean, he was able to leave my sister and I quite a bit of money.
Was that money accumulated during? Did he have money when he went off on his own? Did his family leave him money, or did he make all of that money? Did he?
I think things were good. I think he made money as a farmer, but not a lot. He made a pretty good living. But my mom was a school teacher in New York State. Teachers Association or whatever it was. So they always had that money to rely on. And she was a good teacher, and the school system liked her. So whether the farm was a success or not, they always liked being able to go to Florida whenever they wanted to, or down to Mexico, or they had a pretty good life.